the regular climate is the best. So for example, maybe like wine. No wine drinkers. You probably know about Napa. That developed as one of the greatest wine producing regions in the world over just the last 30, 40 years. They found that that's a perfect climate, learned how to deal with the climate, found the right grapes, found the right way to grow them, find the right soils, and it became a premier wine region. That is changing now. Some things don't grow as well. You can also grow grapes in Fresno, but you don't make wine from that. You grow raisins, right? They are growing wine in England again after about 700 years. There was about 700 years. This is the wine. There's wine coming out of England. So things change. There is a Napa wine growers climate change committee. That was how are they going to cope with it? Change crops, move where they are, all those kinds of things. Right? Food supply is affected. That is also affecting, well, a lot of things, malnutrition. There's a shortage of basic grain crops over the last few years. There's some analyses that say that the kind of upheavals that resulted in the Arab Spring have to do with reduced food supply and rising food costs. That's sort of exacerbated, and sometimes in a good way, but brought some problems to a head. But it was one of the underlying conditions that made people start to respond to the situation in the country. Air pollutants. When it gets warmer, it promotes the formation of ozone. It doesn't have to be a heat wave, just a little bit more, just a little bit warmer, that kind of thing. So we feel that here, you get smog. It increases asthma, those kinds of things. Right? Heat we know about, gets too hot. I'll be talking a lot about that, but heat waves are more dangerous than floods. More people die every year from extreme heat than from the more catastrophic, very dramatic kind of climate events. Disease transmission, I mentioned, storms and flooding, civil conflict. If you have all these problems, it tends to promote civil conflict. Some of the wars that you may be paying attention to, I hear a little bit over one group is coming in somewhere else. In Africa, Darfur, the group that's coming in is leaving an area where the food production is going down. They happen to be militarily more powerful than the people they're moving in on. So there's already that difference in military power, there's different ethnic groups, all that. But the one underlying force is that this migration out of an area that's having a problem with agriculture. And wherever you go, there's somebody, wherever you go that might be desirable to live, somebody's already there. So you get conflicts like that. Drives a lot of things. Displacement, and all of those things, whether it's directly by illnesses, whether it's by injuries from flood, whether it's by wars, results in physical harm to people. So I'll be going over this kind of general scale, then we'll move into other scales. Movie trap. So that's some of the impacts. I think climate change, it's different from other what you would call environmental problems. I think it's even a problem. It's even a problem to call it an environmental issue because in a lot of people's mind, the environment is this. Here we are, and the environment's over there. Or there's a certain category of concerns that are considered environment. You know, the polar bears, you know, spectacular natural wild areas, right? This problem is the environment. The environment is the planet, and it's everything that we depend on. So it's different from, I think, the way environmental issues have been conceptualized. It's also different because some things are irreversible. Once it happens, it's not going to go back the other way, or it's going to take possibly millennia to go back. Right, and there's not a safe place, so there's very few safe places. I'll give you an example. I worked with atomic bomb survivors and the long-term health effects a while ago. So if you know the bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Hiroshima over 100,000 just vaporized with the bomb, and then maybe 2 or 3 times as many with illnesses that followed from radiation exposure. It's horrible, right? You've seen pictures of it. But I was in Hiroshima in the 1970s, working at a research institute. And it's a small town, and you can go back. So even something of a nuclear city that's been bombed by a nuclear bomb, with hundreds of thousands kilobyte, you can actually go back there. The radiation dies down, goes safe, and the life goes on. In a way, it's irreversible. There's time to recover. Chernobyl is contaminated. At some point, people will be able to go back there. There are some effects that might not switch here. If the ice caps melt, it's going to be hard to switch it back. You may have to get very, very cold to restore those things when the system depends on it. There's ocean circulations. Once it goes, you don't know how it's going to come back. So there are big things that you can't change back. You can't clean it up. You can clean up a Superfund site, but the Earth system is on such a big scale that it either can't be restored or it will take a very, very long time with enormous effort to do it. So I think it's on a scale that's different from anything else. So that's the pattern. Anything on that before I go into looking at the kind of inequalities that are involved in the issue? There's a lot of inequalities. If you think about climate change, you have the cause, right? All the things that are causing the increase in greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere. We have the effects, the impacts, what happens because of that. And then we have the way people are able to respond to it. How they're going to try to address the greenhouse gases, how they're going to address the harms that are coming down, how to survive it, how to cope with it. And there's inequalities in all of this. So the first inequality to look at is responsibility for the problem. And one of the things is that the countries, the places, the corporations, the locales that are responsible for greenhouse gas emissions are, in most cases, different from the places that are being harmed the most. So basically, those who put out the most stuff and those who get the most harm immediately are not the same. But basically, we do it and someone else gets it. There's a few places where it's both. It's kind of a closed loop, and that's an interesting thing. I think China's one of those. Big polluter, and they have crop problems, they got floods, all of that. So there's a closed loop. This is a chart. This is population going this way. So the wider something is, the more people. And this is the amount of greenhouse gases measured as CO2 equivalent. So it's all the greenhouse gases translated into tons of CO2. So the taller it is, the more that has been put out. And that's the world emissions. So one thing you can see is that if you look at South Asia, very, very large, right? That would probably be about 1.5 billion, I think, people. But only, what is that? Well, I guess 13% of the world population, 4%, 3.5% of the greenhouse gases. Lots of people, few emissions. And this is a total from the region. On the other end, we have the USA and Canada. This is a little bit low because you have to move China up. But the USA and Canada, what have we got together? Maybe not 500 million yet. We're about 330, about 400. So about that many, but responsible for about a quarter of the emissions.
How old is this?
This is from, I think, the 2007 report, so it's probably like from maybe 2005. So I think you would move China. I think China may be included in here, and you'd have a different chart. But China is, I think, China alone is something. I think the US and China are about 20% each now. So there have been some shifts, but I don't think that South Asia or Africa has become a big emitter in the meantime. We have some other groups that are in this category now. But the general pattern is small numbers of people, large emissions. So when we look at the impacts, so let's use a few of them here. Here's drought. The redder it is, the heavier the drought. And there's certain places that are very bad drought. In this case, Africa in particular is suffering from drought. And there's been a long-term recognition of desertification. And there's a number of reasons, but I think it's hard to understand that the rainfall, precipitation, because of climate change is one of the causes of so these places. The United States has been in drought, so this is a little bit older, but Africa has been most severe. So we saw Africa with larger population, small emissions, we're getting hit by drought very heavily. So Africa's hit the hardest by drought. If we updated this, it would be